That saves me time for the introductions. So I'll be talking about enabling digital transformation to drive success, taking in point VISIO with other products in the Microsoft family, and how you'll see how Microsoft's approach to digital transformation trickles down to VISIO product strategy. Then we'll talk about bidirectional process modeling with VISIO and Excel, where I'll talk about how we bring together the power of data and visual models to drive intelligence and successful processes. Then we'll talk about real-world process dashboards, where we bring together the power of visual diagrams created in VISIO with business insights that you have in Power BI dashboards. And then we'll move on to automation, where we'll talk about integration of VISIO with Flow to take your business process models to the next level so that you can automate it. And finally, we'll touch base onto process documentation, where we'll talk about how we make it easier for the business analysts to create process documentation starting from their business process maps in VISIO. So before we begin, with a quick show of hands, how many of you have used VISIO? That's really awesome. It's really humbling to see so many people engaging with the product. And as you can see, VISIO has applications across various industries, be it financial services, engineering and manufacturing, professional services, telecommunications, and other services. We have over 12 million users, and more than 90% of the Fortune 100 companies use VISIO. Now, let me put up these big data points to wake you all up. Today, across process, collaboration, and data, among the surveyed companies, 60% of the companies expect the budgets to increase for compliance functions, including their processes. Among the American workers, 43% of the workers actually spend time working remotely and thus challenging the traditional concepts of collaboration. And as you all know, digital data is going to grow 50-fold until 2020, leading to 44 trillion gigabytes by that time. So what does this mean? I'm sure you will now all agree that we are living in a time of inflection. And digital transformation is the biggest change any of us has seen in our lifetime. Today, organizations, if they want to be competitive, they need to bring together their people, their data, and their processes to drive success, whether it is, and to deliver value to their customers, whether it is transforming their operations, engaging their customers, empowering their employees, or transforming their products radically. Now, this is a journey that involves the entire organization, starting from planning to collaboration to execution to monitoring, so that you know whether whatever transformation you have done is aligning with your strategy or you need to do course correction. And in this session, as we proceed along, we'll see how VISIO with other Microsoft products helps you in each part of the journey. So before I proceed further to talk about VISIO's innovations, I would like to talk about the Microsoft 365 approach to digital transformation, which works on these principles of working naturally with ink, voice, and touch to visualize information in new ways, to build on the work and enterprise of others, and to create compelling content with intelligent apps. And likewise, in VISIO, we strive to unlock your creativity so that you can spark innovation, create and communicate diagrams in a professional way, collaborate and innovate with your team, and of course, connect your diagrams to live data to generate insights. So let's see how we do this in a data-driven process modeling world. So I'm going to talk about democratizing process modeling with Data Visualizer, which is one of the key enhancements we delivered in VISIO in the past one and a half year. So what does democratizing mean here? As we were talking about digital transformation in the last session, Mr. Ashish and Mr. Ashutosh were talking about bringing people of different skill sets together, bringing people and technology together. So unless all of your stakeholders are contributing effectively in the digital way for process modeling, it can never succeed. So with VISIO, what we've done is that we have brought VISIO and Excel together to give more power to you. So in a nutshell, we have kind of brought more people into the ambit of process modeling who need not even know VISIO. They just need to know Excel. So I'll quickly talk about the few capabilities of the product here, and then I'll show you a nice demo, and then I'll talk about a real world case study so that you can relate to how it is being implemented by customers in the real world. So we have certain pre-made Excel process map templates that allow you to capture data in a structured format in Excel, or you can bring in your own data. I'm sure a lot of you would be maintaining Excel files and different documentations to capture the essence of your process. Now, how do you derive the insight out of it, or how do you create the actual process out of it, is something I'll show subsequently. We'll automatically create diagrams from these data using any shapes, stencils of your choice, so that you can enforce standardization in your organization, so that you use notations that your customers follow. And what's interesting is that the diagram and the data are in a two-way sync. By that I mean, you can choose to work visually on the diagram, or if you're comfortable with data, you can choose to work in the data, and the diagram and data will remain in a perfect sync. And finally, to make your own templates and share it in your organization, we have features that allow you to create template packages so that you can create once and reuse multiple times. So without much further ado, I'll just switch on to the demo. So what we've done is that we've introduced certain process map templates in Excel. So these templates are pre-made templates, and as I mentioned earlier, you can use your own data as well. Let me just move on to a populated template so that I can talk about it. I hope it's clearly visible. So essentially, this is a process map template capturing the list of activities that you need to perform in a business process. As you can see, each process has a certain description, it has certain dependencies, it could be a next activity or a previous or a predecessor. There are certain notations by the virtue of shape type. You can call out what kind of notation you want that activity to be represented with. And then of course, in the cross-functional scenarios, you need to call out which function performs a particular activity and in which phase of the process is that activity getting executed. And of course, no process is complete with the structure. You need to capture all the metadata along with your process. For instance, which is the owner of a particular step? What are the number of tickets? So in this example, we are talking about a loan disbursement process, and hence we are calling out the number of active tickets. This could be live data that is coming from your line of business applications, your CRM systems, and it can update on a certain frequency. Now what we're going to do is that we'll switch on to VISIO, where we have introduced the new templates. I'm showing you the cross-functional template. All you need to do is create your own data, process map data, share it in your organization, collaboratively work on that data, capture requirements from people who know nothing about business process modeling. What they need to know is about the content of the process. And once you've captured that, just point it to the data source. And since this is a pre-made template, everything is automatically done for you. However, I would like to call out that if this was your own template, and if this was the name of your team, let's say it was called responsible teams in your organization, you can easily map those columns from your data. Now, you can also map the kind of notations you want to use. You can add any number of shapes to your diagram. You can use BPMN notations. You can use notations from your organization. And of course, you can define how are the dependencies captured in your data. And again, since this was a pre-made template to help our users get started quickly, all you could have done is click this button on the very first step, and VISIO will take the entire data and transform it into a process map in a matter of seconds. So as you can see, all the functions are created from the data, the phases, the shapes which get connected. And this is a data-driven diagram, so essentially all your metadata is captured as part of shape data in VISIO. Now, the idea is how do you use it? So no process is complete without overlaying the metrics or the metadata of the process to enhance consumption. So as you can see this pane here, you can easily apply certain graphics onto your process. This was a loan disbursement process, so we'll just kind of turn this diagram from a static diagram into a dashboard by just allocating the active tickets and let's say the risk profile onto it. So as you can see, if I may just zoom in a little, that the active tickets are being called out by a nice data bar, and a flag icon shows the kind of risk profile, low, medium, or high, and you can add legends so that people understand it. And these are pretty much customizable from our gallery. You can choose anything. But the key idea is that this has now become a live diagram. It has now become more insightful than before. So let me go back to the Excel file. No process diagram in the real world goes without iterations. I'm sure you would all agree to that. So you understand as the process iterates, as you talk to the stakeholders, that, hey, there is another step required towards the end of the process. So what you can do is that you can easily modify the data. Let's say you call a document the end of process. And then you would like to end your step. So you can just quickly hook up all the dependencies in the data, and you can add any number of rows in your data to call out your process. And you can define the custom notations. And you can do any number of changes, be it deletion of rows, addition of rows, changing certain functions or phases. And a lot of it is optional. It totally depends on your scenario. Now let me save the changes in the Excel file and come back to Visio. So as I promised earlier, there is a two-way sync between the data and diagram. If I may just zoom out a little, and then let's notice how the diagram changes as I refresh it. And this works with your cloud Excel files. So you can collaborate, keep your files in the cloud. So as you can see, a new step got added. Of course, the metrics are 0 because I haven't added those. But the diagram got updated and added the new steps. And now, let's see what happens when you work visually and you would like to update your data. Just close this file for a moment. So a lot of times you will see when the business is reviewing your process, you would like to make changes on the fly. So let's say you see that this process goes from linking the application to preparing the documents. And let's say you want to add another step here, which says check the account links. So now once you have done all your changes on the diagram, you can add new process steps, you can delete or modify existing process steps. You can just go ahead and click a button, and wherever your Excel file is, whether it's on the cloud or on your machine, being shared with multiple users, it just goes and updates that Excel file. So if I go back and open the loan disbursement process map again, you will see how Visio updates the data from the diagram. So there you go, it added a new step here with all the relevant metadata. So this way we support a two-way linkage between the diagram and data so that we allow you to either work visually or work in the data. So finally, as I talked about earlier, you can actually create a template of your own. So this was an out-of-box template, but let's say you want to use your own shapes, your own data file, your own formats, your own metrics, whatever notation you want to add. You can create all that, create a template package, and distribute it as a business analyst in your organization for your stakeholders to reuse it without having to do any kind of mapping. So I'll move back to my deck. So this was about the current capabilities. In future, what we are planning to do is that we're going to build an Office add-in so that you can create diagrams directly in Excel. So what does this mean? This means that you need no Visio installation. All you need is just type a few steps in Excel. As you see, there's a pop-up there which is an add-in in Excel. So we're trying to build an add-in so that you can distribute that template that you create with all your stakeholders. They don't need to have the Visio client or the Visio online browser version. All they need is an Excel file, and they just need to be an Office 365 customer to quickly have a, or just to say that, create process maps with the simplicity of creating charts. Now, let's move on to some customer success stories. So I'll talk about this company called Corporate Health. It's a US-based healthcare startup, and it's a revolutionary startup. They're building certain pills which kind of do an imagery of your colon. They're working into the colonoscopy area. So they did some quality management systems innovation using data visualizer. As I mentioned, it's a company which builds scalable health services with capsule endoscopy. But I'd like to talk about how they actually build their QMS innovation with data visualizer. So they have a lot of SOPs, the standard operating procedures and process flows in their organization, which the nurses and the field agents have to follow when they collect customer data and how they collect the customer files, how it gets processed, and so on and so forth. So what they did was that they used data visualizer to create process maps. They use SharePoint to create standardized SOP libraries, so where you can just access your own process maps. And then they use these process maps, as I showed earlier, to create flowcharts and henceforth create their Word SOPs. So what did this mean for them? This is the exact customer quote. The focus actually shifted from form to function. That is, they spent 80% of their time on content and 20% of their time on appearance, because the appearance was delegated to Visio. They need not worry about the kind of diagram output that they need to create, the kind of shapes, the connectors, and how to place them. All they need to focus on is the content of their process, which actually improved their efficiency. Now, all their CIOs, their medical officers, and their nurse managers contribute to the process. So they've brought all these people under the ambit of digital, because they can now actually share their learnings from the field to the process by just using Excel. And then the owner of the process can, define or enhance the process diagram to create the SOPs. And as you can see, it's a loop. They get feedback and then incorporate all that. So that was about the customer case study. There's another customer which had their own case management system. It's called Plexus Law. They capture it's a law firm, so all the cases that they process, the transactions are captured in a database. So with Data Visualizer, they extracted that data from the database and bridged the gap between technology and business by effectively visualizing those data sets into process maps so that they understand how their as-is process looks like. And moving on, we'll talk about how you can use Visio to bring real-world visualizations to Power BI dashboards and make them more insightful. So what does this mean? Let me give you some background, and then I'll give you real-world examples. So there are two key terms on the slide. It's a bit busy, I'm not sure if you can see it, but there is operational intelligence, and then there is business intelligence. So when you see Power BI or any dashboard for that matter, you see a lot of charts and bar graphs and a lot of Sankey diagrams and whatnot. All this is business intelligence information. But the real-world operations which get executed also leave some traces, also leave some data. That is where the operational intelligence comes in. With Visio and Power BI, you can bring together this as unified dashboards and see the full picture. To give a very contemporary example, I'm sure you all must have heard, IKEA is opening up in Hyderabad today. Now, up till their opening, I'm sure they would have had a lot of business intelligence in terms of what kind of products, what kind of SKUs do they sell, to what segment of the customer, be it a family, be it an individual, be it a couple. But now when they open, with IoT today, they can gather real-time insights. They can track eyeball movements, how people move on to their store floor, what is the movement of the crowd, where is the crowd engaging, where is the conversion of crowd to buying happening. That's what operational insight is. Now, you can never get the true picture unless you see the real-world visuals along with the graphs and then derive insight. So now, Power BI, as you all know, helps you connect your data and get powerful dashboards. But what I want to talk about is the context. So as I was talking about, assume the same process of loan disbursement or any business process for that matter. You can see that, I'll just call it out for you, there is a stack bar graph at the top which shows the expected SLA for tickets and the actual SLA for the tickets for various steps. And then the graph below shows the resource allocated for each of the activities. Now, what does it mean to get operational insights into this? It means to give it context. Now, this is your process map, and it has the metrics along with it. This is the process that you're tracking, and the process has its own metrics shown by certain colors, and it's all interactive. Now, I wanted to show you a demo, but because of internet connectivity, I cannot show it as it is an online demo. But the key idea here is that as a business analyst or the owner of the process, I can see that there is a step which is called out in red color. Now I can quickly click on that step and the graphs below it will modify accordingly. So that is what contextual dashboarding or unified dashboarding is. To give you, as I mentioned, the demo is not possible because of connectivity, but this is an animated slide and I hope you can see it properly. It's calling out the same thing. This is a floor plan for a shopping company, a retail outlet company. the owner is using the dashboard to understand why is the color shows the stocking and the sales for the certain t-shirts or trousers or whatever product they've placed there. So that the analyst can easily pan the diagram and see that, okay, why is my sale low in a certain corner of the store? Because he can see that from the numbers on the right that the sales are dropping. But the real context comes when the analyst goes to that diagram and sees that, hey, there is an obstruction for people to turn around and explore that rack, so they cannot actually see the products. This information or this insight is not possible without the real world diagrams that we have placed in the Power BI dashboards. So this gives you a new perspective, obviously, and you can drill down into specific data elements, as I mentioned. It's very interactive. You can filter, and you can highlight, and you can work across your diagrams and charts. And the examples are multifold, be it inventory management, be it your organizational performance, or root cause analysis. It could be facility monitoring or business process monitoring. There are links out there. You can reach out to me after the presentation. We have samples for all of these so that you can understand how can you apply this to real world scenarios. Let's also talk about certain customer success stories. So we'll talk about Talon, which is a technology service firm, and how they use Power BI to actually integrate their workflows and better demonstrate the flow of files and claims. So earlier they were only using Power BI dashboards, but with actually overlaying this data onto their own processes and the workflows of the claims for a certain product, they could actually see how it adds more transparency and more clarity to their thought process because they get their insights in context of their process. Now, next I'll talk about Microsoft Flow and VISIO. So VISIO is foraying into the space of automation with this. It's a new innovation we are working on, where VISIO integrates with Microsoft Flow, which as you all know, is an automation or orchestration product from Microsoft. So the key idea here is that once you've created your BPMN diagrams, how can you just, with certain markups to that diagram, add certain actions or certain triggers and export these diagrams as flows? So this means you can use your existing BPMN diagrams and automate them. We'll quickly see a walkthrough and a demonstration about this. So this actually helps you to automate your existing processes. And not just that, if you're already using Flow and you've created certain workflows there, will help you bring those workflows into VISIO so that you can review them. I'm sure you all know automation is the part where technology is involved, but business wants to see the process. They want to understand what are you automating. To review that, to present that, it's important to visualize your automated workflows. We have out-of-box VISIO shapes that will allow you to capture your processes and then quickly export them to Flow by adding triggers and actions, and I'll talk about that shortly. Then you can collaborate directly within VISIO. So as you all know, VISIO supports comments and chat platforms, so you can create your BPMN diagram, share it with the stakeholders so that they can comment on the level of automation that is expected, and then you can mark it up and then actually execute it. So I'll just show you a quick mock-up regarding this. Again, because of connectivity issues, I apologize, I cannot show this online demo. But the key idea is that as a business process owner or a business analyst, you've created your BPMN diagram, but the next step, the next level you want to take it is automation. So how do you do that? You can now, since we integrate with Flow, you can quickly get the triggers and actions in Flow. So essentially, what does this mean? You define a trigger. Let's say this is a procurement process. So if a new purchase request is created, how do you get that? Probably if you're using SharePoint for that, you can just add a trigger that if a new item gets added in a SharePoint list, then that's a trigger. So how do you handle that trigger? The process calls that out. So you can add n number of triggers, you can add multiple actions to the different steps of the process, which say that what should happen at each step of the process when it gets automated. That means probably when a certain credit risk assessment is happening and it fails, you need to notify the customer, so you need to send an email. So you need that automation over there. If the loan that the company is giving out to the customer is greater than a certain amount, you need a higher level of approval. So probably you need to flag that and raise probably an RSS feed or a certain a notification to the required stakeholders. So all those factors can be incorporated as flow actions. And what happens is that when you export this, it actually generates an automated workflow in Microsoft Flow, where you can specify the parameters, what needs to happen at each point of the process, and then your process is automated. Now, just to summarize it, it's kind of a 3-step process, starting with describing your business process, moving on to marking it up with the trigger definition and the actions, and finally, you can export it to Flow to automate it. Now moving on to the next topic is about transcribing your process workflows into written documentation. So we all know that we cannot do away with process documentation. You either need it for manuals, or you need it for compliance purpose. You need it to show to your auditors, or you need it for knowledge transitions. But it's a very cumbersome process to create these process diagrams, process manuals. So what we have done is that you can easily capture all the essence of the document right within your diagram. So essentially, when you create your diagram, you can add a lot of metadata to it. You can define all of the roles and functions and the dependencies, the input documents required to process a certain activity. That all of these things can be captured right within your diagram, and then with a single click of a button, you can export it to a Word document, which you can further enhance by adding all of the relevant hyperlinks or additional process manual information. So this will help you save time without sacrificing the quality of your documentation. And we're also working to understand how customers need their own templates, their own standards of documentation. So we're also looking at supporting those scenarios where you can define how do you want your document to be created, what level of details do you want to capture, and what is the structure of the document. So you can do all that, and you can ensure consistency all across your documentation. So with that, I would like to call out that if you want to connect with us, we have the different channels. You can connect with us at VISIO, which is an email ID where your questions or your concerns or your feedback directly reaches us. You can join our webcasts, and you can vote for features on user voice. And then, of course, there are blogs where you can follow the latest innovations. With this, I would open the house for certain questions you have. And I would like to come back to the agenda. Probably that would spark the questions in your mind. I can quickly summarize. We started with Microsoft's approach to digital transformation and how VISIO helps you unlock your creativity, create professional diagrams, and visualize information in various ways. We talked about the bidirectional process modeling with VISIO and Excel, and then we talked about dashboarding with Power BI to give real-world contextual dashboards. And then finally, automation with Flow and Microsoft VISIO. Take your processes to the next level by business process automation. And then, of course, we ended with the documentation to ease out the cumbersome process of documentation, making it more automated. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them now.
Hi, so in the past, I have worked on a lot of clients with the BPM space, and my concern has always been adding the element of real-time simulation.
Right.
So I have, if you have heard of a tool called Sparks Enterprise Architect, I have worked on Pega and a bit on IBM WebSphere Business Integration. So all of these tools have their own specific flavor while you are implementing on client-specific projects and the requirements. Right. So while I was working with a big bank where they had this audit requirements, and they had their reports to be created, as you said, like the metadata, or like we called it as metrics, process metrics, right, starting from what are the process description and how you generate the process documentation. So as you can see, as I could see, there is only one Word doc that you are offering as of now.
Right.
So in the tool that I use, there is most probably Sparks, and they had a different array. You can export it to Word, PDF, as in when what you need. along with this, we called it as value packs
All right.
to be created out of the process. But my only point is like, as and when it is required, and Visio for me has been a very static tool, but it has been really dynamic how I can use it in the current context where I'm solving or showing just, this is something very new, upcoming, I haven't used it. So how you picture a Visio is more or less a bit static for me. As you told about like how Visio can drill down to a process flow automation. So have you taken care of the real-time simulation concept? So suppose it is a loan disbursement process and you think of automating it. Does it, you can do that tweaking of the process where you want to automate the process just at the flow level or a Visio process diagram level where actually it is getting implemented at the back end and it is doing things, or it is just static, or just from a realization perspective and there is somebody or a technology team who is taking it back and implementing it?
All right, great. I saw a couple of questions there.
So my focus would be on the last one.
Right.
So how can, does Visio and the flow integrated together?
Right.
Does it enable me to simulate a particular process?
Right.
And work through, as in the real-time automation can happen then and there itself?
Right. So great question, first of all. So as I mentioned, this is a new area we are working on, but this is definitely on our roadmap. And I totally get your question. So obviously, automating a certain process is just one part of it. When your process actually gets orchestrated, you identify the improvements that you can make, or the tweaks, as you called out, you can make. So our goal or our roadmap is actually to create a perfect loop, as you may call it. So you're taking your BPMN diagrams for automation to flow, then you're bringing back your actual ongoing the flows which are getting executed back to Visio. You can tweak it, as you called out, to simulate what will happen for the various tweaks. And not just this, if you know that if for any automation, the system leaves a lot of data, the traces for each of the steps getting executed. So one of the core scenarios is also to monitor that. So you have your process, but what's the aggregate view of the process? What's the average view for a certain metric? How is, in how many cases, what you actually envisioned is happening? What are the failure paths? So those are areas which we are exploring. So to answer your question in short, this is on our roadmap. We've just started with this. It's not even available yet to our customers. It will soon be. So thanks for the feedback.
It was really interesting, and I'd love to have a tap on this.
Yeah,
Thank you.
And just to add to it, to the part, I agree with you. For a time, Visio was perceived to be very static, but now it integrates with a suite of products and addresses a suite of a category of needs for our users. For example, some things which I didn't show is like, we talked about exporting to PDF. That is something which Visio does today. What it does even more beautifully is exporting to PowerPoint. So you can just mark out sections of your diagram, and Visio creates a presentation for your diagram in PowerPoint. So it's intelligent export to PowerPoint. And of course, I talked about multiple other import and exports or integrations.
So this is something what I had been missing for the last 6-7 years of my journey, where I started with the BPM space. And that is the time when I wanted to take Visio, because it was easier from being a BPM consultant at that point in time, and not having those features where actually it limited the client not to go with Visio and go with some other product. Thank you.
Right.
Cheers.
Yes, sir.
Typically speaking, when you automate the business process, it's not static. What happens is, over a period of time, it could be a week, it could be a month, business keeps changing its process. Right. At that point, when you automate it, you have to change that change in process also. Is it possible for you to include a particular, let's say, some sort of a signal that will tell, okay, if this particular process is changed, these are the areas that could get possibly affected, as some sort of a warning signal. A very simple example would be, let's say you automate this business process, saying that there are going to be 500 people over here.
Right.
And then suddenly you are going, I mean, like for whatever reason, it becomes like 650 people. Now the effect of the 650 people is going to be in terms of the buffet, is going to be in terms of the seating arrangements, is going to be in terms of many other factors, the logistics. So these factors will also have to be incorporated when that change takes place from 500 to 650 people. So that is the thing. Is it possible for you to give some sort of signal or let's say a warning saying that this change in this process will possibly have an effect on these areas, the downstream ramifications,
Right.
maybe upstream also.
Right. Yeah,
That
thank
kind
you
of-
for your question. So, is it possible? I probably think it is. But do we do it now? Not yet. But what the space, how we see it is, I would split it into two parts. One of the parts is the rules that you talked about. For instance, the place has to staff 90 or 100 people, per table some 10 or 12 people or something like that. And you define rules. What if the threshold goes above or below this? And then are the triggers, like if the condition is met, if it passes or fails, what is the trigger? So probably we don't have these features yet, but once we go into the automation space with Flow, I see this happening along with Flow and of course Power BI, because you need to monitor the actual automation data. And once you monitor it, you can define the rules and you can see on the dashboards either user-driven or automated triggers, which automated rules, which kind of run the triggers.
Yeah, the problem over here is actually because it's driven by business and business keeps chopping and changing.
Right.
They'll bring in an idea.
Right.
If they find it doesn't work out, they'll remove that idea. So for that idea, you'll have to incorporate a process. When they
Right.
remove that idea, the process is redundant, so you need to remove it. Or,
Right.
they'll bring in an idea somewhere else that will have an effect over here.
Right.
So all these things.
So actually, you brought up a very beautiful point, and that's one of the reasons we integrated. We went into the VISIO to Flow space. Is that your IT, your technology would probably do the automation, creating these flows, but your business will not change the process viewing these flows. That's why they need the actual process diagrams, and not the complexity of the automation flow diagrams, but the business process diagrams to make these tweaks. And that's why, as I was calling out earlier, we do need a complete circle, but we've just started into this space, and thank you so much for the feedback. That really helps.
Yeah, one suggestion that I have is you can have a macro kind of a VISIO followed by some sort of a micro VISIOs, wherein you have main processes and then you have sub processes, and then identify which of the main process, if there is going to be a change, which of the sub processes could be affected. So this VISIO could be some sort of a micro process, and then on top of it you could have a macro process. Let's say a change in sales will have an effect in its operations. The operations will have its own processes, sales will have its processes, but there should be some sort of macro thing where, okay, this kind of change in sales is going to have an effect over here, so we need to inform sales. So that way the organization will not work in silos. They will work in conjunction with each other. The departments will work in conjunction with each other.
Right. I understand. Thank you.
Yeah, hi Shashank, this is Deepak here from HSBC. As I understand, automating a business process flow with the help of Microsoft Visio, there are certain other tools in the market like Blue Prism. I'm sure Microsoft must have done their due diligence before getting into this roadmap of automating the business process flow. So I would like to know, Blue Prism is one of the flagship tools which all the major industries are using for automating their business processes. So how is it different from Blue Prism and the Microsoft automation in terms of business process flow?
So I would not do a comparison chart here in terms of two products, but what I would like to say is that earlier, I'm not sure if you're aware, Visio was used for SharePoint Designer. There was a SharePoint Designer template where people who were not familiar with or felt easy just creating diagrams used to create those diagrams and then exported it to a SharePoint workflow. Now, Flow has actually replaced SharePoint in a way in terms of automation. So that is where we want to cater to the needs of people who still feel comfortable in designing it visually. So I would like to say that the power of Visio is the simplicity or the ease of creating such diagrams. And as you saw, we can create them from data, or you can drag and drop and create them. There are several templates. There are industry standard notations. So that is what the power of Visio is. Now with this, we are augmenting or kind of extending that power by starting with a simplicity, a scenario of simplicity, and taking it to automation. To draw comparison would be too early for us right now. We've just started kind of integrating with Flow, so that's all I would like to say.
Where I come from is actually, Blue Prism is a tool is actually based on the BPMN modeling.
Right.
And where I can see Visio is also going on the same path and automating the processes. So that's where my question was actually.
Right, so great. So I get more perspective to your question now. So I gave an example of BPMN, but again, what I'm trying to indicate is that A person who would like to automate need not be a BPMN expert when he's starting with VISIO. Your standard business process flow charts, your workflow diagrams can also reach this stage because of the markup that I called out, right, that you can do and then automate it. So you need not be a master in BPMN notations. All you need to know is just designing a workflow visually.
Last question. How soon we can see this in the market?
What you can do is that I'll soon. So I talked about connecting with us from the various forums. I don't have a date for you right now, but you can follow us on the blogs, or you can contact us for any further details. So you'll soon get to know about it when we blog it.
Hi, one question. Okay. You talked about that multiple people can go update the processes, right? So
Right.
is there a tracking mechanism? So if 5 people have updated, who has updated what, and at the, like what was the original image and now the next one?
If you're using Cloud Visio files and you're using SharePoint or OneDrive, so SharePoint has versioning where you can mark your document library to capture versioning, so you can see the versions and then compare across versions what changes happen. We're also working on collaboration features which tell you what kind of changes were made to your diagram, like while you were away and those sort of things. If you're using data-driven diagrams, then Excel supports a beautiful cohort story today, where you can see different versions of the file and even see what changes happened in each version. So there are different collaboration touch points. If you're looking for a kind of tracking pane, where you can see the individual changes that happen.
Yeah, something like, say, for example, if I have changed a process, why I have changed the process, so that next person, whosoever, or other audience, like they would know that what is the reasoning and why we have made those changes.
So that's only possible with versioning today in SharePoint, and not the exact way that you described.
Hi Shashank, thank you for the first session, which is actionable in nature for the whole day. We can go home and try it out. Now, one of the problems with Microsoft Office 365, whether it is Visio Online or Power Apps or Power Flow, is that if I have a personal account as well as a corporate account, the transfer of data between both of these accounts is seamless. So that's fantastic from a product perspective, but that's a nightmare from a chief risk office perspective, because all of your company's confidential data can get exchanged between person and but how do we stop that? Is there a thought process behind when we are designing this Visio to Power BI?
So with Visio to Power BI, again, as I mentioned, we have industry standard security when you're using our cloud platforms like OneDrive for Business, SharePoint. And the Power BI scenario that I showed you actually works with these platforms as hosts. So I'll go back to the example that I was showing earlier. Essentially what I'm trying to say is that your diagrams are in the cloud, which is highly secure. Your Power BI data is again coming from systems that are secure. So only risk question is, I mean, the power of managing the risk is totally in your hands. And we don't, I mean, all of these features work with your, when you're working in OneDrive for Business, it's your work account, and it's completely secure where your Visio files are hosted. So the data transactions are in your hand. The way you design it using these two products is completely secure. And we can chat more about it after the session if you would like to understand. All right, so if there are no further questions, I would like to thank you all for attending the session, and so do connect with us on these platforms, and we would love to hear from you. Your feedback is very valuable to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Shashank.